Hi, today we're going to read A Visit to the General Store. So if you, just like every time we read, we want to look at the title, we're going to look at the pictures, and we're going to make predictions about what we're going to read today. So take a look at that picture. And so I want you to be thinking about when you are making predictions, you're also using the information you already have. So you have read Sarah Plain and Tall, or most of Sarah Plain and Tall. You've read a few other stories, so you have other information about settlers and the way people lived 100 years ago. So all of those things help you to make predictions. So we're going to start, and I'm going to stop along the way and ask you questions, and I want you to press pause if you need some time to think about them. But I'm going to model some skills that we use as good readers or successful readers. A Visit to the General Store, written by Barbara Greenwood. Sarah jumped down as Paul pulled their wagon to a stop in front of the general store. She held a crock of butter in her hands as she ran up the steps of the store. Her toe caught and she stumbled. The crock flew out of her hands. So right now I have a question. I'm not really sure what a crock is. So I'm going to reread that. I'm going to go back and reread so that I might get some clues from the sentences. And then I'm going to take a look at the pictures that might help us to make a good prediction or guess what that might mean. She held a crock of butter in her hands as she ran up the steps of the store. So if you're holding it in your hands, it's probably not just butter in her hands, right? So it's probably a container. And I've heard the word crock pot before. That's something you can cook in, so I'm wondering if it's something to do with like a container for food. And then if I look at the picture below, it does look like there is almost like a cookie jar coming out of her hands as she tripped. And in the next sentence it says the crock flew out of her hands. So I think that we're pretty close with our guess. Be careful with your butter, dear. Sarah looked up to see Mrs. Brennan holding out the crock to her. Thank you for saving it, Sarah said as she followed Mrs. Brennan into the store. I churned it myself and I'm going to sell it here. Okay, so there's another word there, churned. Now, I know Mrs. Churn and I know her sons, but if you churn butter, I wonder if this is going to give me more clues about what that means. Mother said I could keep the money I make. I'd like to buy some ribbon for my hair. I didn't get any new clues, so if I don't see a picture and I don't get clues, then I might have to look it up or ask someone. I know it has to do with butter. That's all. You are lucky, said Mrs. Brennan. You must have been having a good season with your cows. Mine aren't giving me any milk now. I'm sorry, said Sarah. Just then, Pa and Sarah's sister Meg came in. Mrs. Brennan turned to talk to them. So I have a connection there that the character in this story's name is Sarah, and we've been reading Sarah Plain and Tall. And then I also noticed that Mrs. Brennan said that she must be having a good season because her cows are not giving any milk. And I have a question. I wonder what would be different between Sarah's cows and Mrs. Brennan's cows. Sarah skipped over to the counter and set her crock down. I'd like to sell my butter, Mr. Jameson. I made it myself. Mother said it is as good as hers. The cow wasn't in the onions now, was she? So I've got a question about that. I don't know what that means. Why would he ask about the onions? So I'm going to keep reading and see if I get an answer. Oh no, my mother would never let me bring butter that tasted like onions. So if the cows get into the onions, then it's going to make their milk taste like onions. Okay, so that makes sense to me. Just teasing, Sarah. Now, how much would you like for it? Did she have to decide? Oh my gosh, I was showing you the wrong page. Did she have to decide? Surely the storekeeper could set the price. I wanted enough for some ribbon, she said. Ribbon? Ooh, that costs a lot. I couldn't give you much, no more than a handspan. He stretched his thumb and little finger apart. Sarah gulped. Such a short piece? I don't know, she thought. I want it. What color would you like? As he spoke, he turned and reached under the counter. Here you are, Mrs. Brennan. He handed the woman a letter. Sarah watched as Mrs. Brennan turned the sealed paper over and over, running her fingers over the edges. Okay, so I have 2 questions from that page. Does ribbon cost more than butter nowadays? And my other question is, why would the author put that last paragraph in there? Sarah watched as Mrs. Brennan turned the sealed paper over and over, running her fingers over the edges. I think that's interesting, that she's really bringing our attention to that envelope. Next page. I'm going to show you the right page this time. Have you decided on a color? Meg asked from behind Sarah. Sarah sighed. I don't know. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Mrs. Brennan hand the letter back to Mr. Jameson. Why is she giving her letter back? She whispered to Meg. I want to know that too. Why would she take the letter and then give it back to him? Can you make a prediction? Why would you think? Okay, let's read on. Everyone's mail comes here to the store, explained Meg. You have to pay the storekeeper before he'll give it to you. Mrs. Brennan can't afford to pay for her letter. She just comes in and looks at it every so often. Mrs. Jameson told me it's from her mother back home. Sarah felt tears rising. How sad. One of those things, Meg shrugged. Ready to go? Pa finished loading the salt on the wagon. Sarah stared at the ribbons. Tell Pa I'll just be a minute. Okay, so there's only 1 page left. I'd like you to make another prediction about how you think this is going to end. Sarah sighed. She still wasn't sure which color she wanted. Just then, Mrs. Brennan left the store. Her shoulders were drooping. So if your shoulders are drooping, what does that tell you about how she's feeling? Because it's not telling us how she's feeling, it's showing us how she's feeling, just like good authors do. So if my shoulders are drooping, they're going to be more downcast, right? There's going to be more of an angle here. Rather than if you're proud or you're excited, your shoulders might be up higher. If you're really anxious or tense or stressed, they might be up here. So if your shoulders are drooping down, what does that tell you about Mrs. Brennan's body language? Now I want you to think about how Sarah feels in this next part. Sarah felt her chest tightening as though the breath had been squeezed out of her. Suddenly, she knew what she had to do. So what is that feeling when your chest is tight and you feel like your breath is squeezed out of you? What is this specific word or feeling? Can we name it? So if we name that feeling, like, is it frustrated? Is it anxious? Is it furious? Is it tired? What is the feeling? Just try to be as specific as you can. Let's try not to use words like happy or sad or mad. Let's try to be really specific. So suddenly she knew what she had to do. I wonder what that is. Mr. Jameson, how much does it cost to pay for a letter? Oh, there's no letter for you today, Sarah. It's Mrs. Brennan's letter. Would my butter be enough? Reckon so, Mr. Jameson said. Sarah held out her hand, keeping her eyes away from the ribbons on the counter. I'll pay for it then. So, how close were you with your prediction? Were you able to make predictions as we went and adjust them, just like good readers do? Is it okay to be wrong with a prediction? Absolutely. I'm wrong a lot of times. I love reading mysteries and I make the wrong predictions all the time. But I also make the right prediction sometimes too. Did you make the right prediction for this? At the end, it's interesting how it said Sarah wouldn't look at the ribbons. Why do you think that is? Have you ever been in a situation like that? So you can find the questions that also go with this story. They're going to be online on one class notebook. So those ones didn't get sent home in the packages, so you can find that there. However, the story is in your package, so you can read along. You can reread. So when you reread, you see the words, and then you remember them better when you remember them where they are on the page, and then you can see the pictures in your mind. So go through those steps like good readers do. Make your predictions, make connections as you go, and enjoy the story. See you later.